We are almost at training camp. We are so close. We can taste it in our mouths, but yet so far away that we still have nothing to talk about. But since we are so close, since we are weeks away, let's look at what each team in the AFC North needs and create a sort of an AFC North training camp guide for people to look into to find out what are the biggest questions for all the AFC North teams this season while they enter training camp. So let's just jump into it. And we're going to jump into it with the first team being the Baltimore Ravens. And while the Baltimore Ravens have a number of things to be interested in during training camp, the number one, the most important thing for the Baltimore Ravens is Lamar Jackson. And specifically, will Lamar Jackson show signs of being an improved passer? Last year, he only passed about 171 times with an awful 58% completion percentage. In order for Baltimore's run game to open up like it did last year, Lamar Jackson's going to have to prove himself as a credible threat from the pocket. Now, this doesn't mean that he has to put up gaudy or unrealistic numbers. This just means that he has to put up standard numbers from behind the pocket that most quarterbacks should be able to do who are NFL caliber. And what I mean by this is I think Lamar Jackson should be able to throw for over 3,000 yards, have over 20 touchdowns with a positive touchdown to interception ratio, and he's able to do that on about a 65% completion percentage. And that's not a huge load to throw on Lamar Jackson's arm. I don't think that's a lot to ask of him, but I think if he's able to produce a season and progress as a passer in that way to put up those numbers, then the Ravens have a lot more depth to their offense, and this offense starts to become a lot more formidable. As it stands right now, they're very one-dimensional, which ended up hurting them in their playoff game against the Los Angeles Chargers and will continue to hurt them as long as they remain one-dimensional. The second thing to look at the Ravens training camp this year is going to be leadership on defense. This year, in this offseason specifically, they lost a ton of leadership. They lost a ton of their veterans and a ton of their key players from last year's defense. They lost CJ Mosley, they lost Eric Weddle, and they lost franchise cornerstone Terrell Suggs. All three of those guys are players whose impact go past the field into the locker room. So needless to say, there is going to be a leadership void on defense. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this team's doomed. No, it means there's a void to be filled. And what's going to be important for the Ravens is who fills that void, how do they fill that void, and if there's a struggle to fill that void, as that will be able to create the identity of this defense. But right now, as I look through the Ravens roster on defense, I don't see anybody who is clearly going to step up and be that emotional leader of the defense. Now, Earl Thomas may be a fantastic player coming off of that injury that he had last season, but Earl Thomas has never been known for his leadership ability. And right now, the Ravens really need somebody who's going to step up and be the leader. And I think during training camp is when we're going to find out who is going to attempt to fill that void. And I think that's going to be one of the most interesting things to watch during this Ravens camp. The next thing, and I think this is an underrated and understated point, I haven't heard a lot of people when they talk about the Ravens talk about how they plan to do this, but this offseason they signed Mark Ingram, which is kind of head-scratching to me because they already had Kenneth Dixon and Gus the Bus Edwards, both guys who are younger on their rookie deals and have both averaged over 5 yards per carry and were a part of that very good rushing attack that they had last season. But also Kenneth Dixon and Gus Edwards are not only younger than the veteran Mark Ingram, but also they are bigger, they are more physically formidable. That makes me wonder, where is Mark Ingram exactly going to fit in this rotation? And who is going to be the odd man out? Because as much as people talk about the three-headed monster or, a three running back system or running back by committee, generally it boils down to two guys. And since all of these guys have pretty similar skill sets, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that combination of running backs. They're definitely talented. Each one of them can definitely start on a lot of NFL teams, but all three of them being on one depth chart is going to create some interesting possibilities as the season goes on. And it's also of note that this situation has a striking similarity to a situation that has happened before in their division, when a team has added a veteran running back to a pair of young running backs that seem to have had a good year the year prior, when the Browns had both Isaiah Crowell and Terrence West and decided to add Ben Tate. And what ended up happening in that situation was Ben Tate ended up getting cut in the middle of the season, but that was more due to locker room issues, but also because he just ended up not getting any of the carries, as the carries went to the two younger running backs. And with Baltimore's situation, I don't know how they're planning on working this out, but I fear that the same thing could happen to Mark Ingram this season. The next team we're going to look at is the Cincinnati Bengals, and they have a few interesting things to look at during their training camp. And I think the number one thing and the key that's going to be going on during Bengals training camp is looking towards the future. This team, while old in a lot of places, does have a lot of nice young pieces like Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon. So it's going to be interesting to see what direction this team goes, because they can go in one of two directions. They can either decide to hold on to what they have and try to compete this season and maybe win 6 to 8 games, or they can decide to just build towards the future. And since this team, and this is my second point, hired one of the youngest head coaches and a head coach who is jumping from a position coach to an NFL head coach, I think that tells you all you need to know about what the Cincinnati's future direction is going to be. Speaking of Zach Taylor, it's going to be something to watch during the camp to see how he connects with his veterans and to see how he just handles making that jump. Now, the second I say that, I know a lot of Cincinnati fans are going to be asking, what about Freddie Kitchens? And I think those two cases are completely different, because Freddie Kitchens is a veteran coach in the league. He's been around longer than Zach Taylor. Also, Freddie Kitchens spent time as the offensive coordinator for the team that he's currently coaching right now, the group of people that he has. I know Zach Taylor has had offensive coordinator experience, but I also don't think he's had enough coaching experience. And I think that's the more important thing in the NFL. How well do you know professional football players? And Zach Taylor is going to have to prove that he knows them well enough to be able to work with the veterans as well as the younger players. And speaking of developing for the future, do you go all in on developing Ryan Lindley, who you drafted, or do you continue to try to develop Jeff Driscoll, who showed signs of being a solid quarterback last year, especially with his mobility? Seeing as Andy Dalton is definitely going to be the starter, and teams generally don't carry a third quarterback, especially a third quarterback who is not a veteran, it's going to leave the Bengals in a weird place where they're going to have to cut bait with either their draft pick or Jeff Driscoll, whoever they feel like is not fit to make the team. That is, of course, assuming that Andy Dalton is going to be the starting quarterback. Now, while I'm not going to sit here and predict that Ryan Finley or Jeff Driscoll are going to beat out Andy Dalton for the quarterback job, Andy Dalton, while people do poo-poo on him a lot, is a lot better than people give him credit for. What I am saying is that I think that the Bengals have a lot of assets that don't necessarily make sense for the directions that they're going as a organization. They have a lot of guys who are in the mid to late part of their prime who could be contributing players on really good teams, but don't really serve a purpose on a bottom feeding team like the Cincinnati Bengals project to be. And I'm speaking of AJ Green, Geno Atkins, and Andy Dalton. These are three guys who can definitely be moved for a lot of assets and help kickstart a proper rebuild in Cincinnati. And it would be interesting if Cincinnati takes more of that NBA approach and starts to trade away some of their older assets, as they realize they're not going to really be useful by the time this team's ready to contend again. Now the next team we're going to look at is the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Pittsburgh Steelers really don't have a lot of questions coming into training camp, despite the amount of change that they've had. I mean, they traded away Le'Veon Bell, they've gotten rid of Antonio Brown, but it looks like this team and this organization has kind of been planning on losing those two players for quite a while now by drafting a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster and getting a guy like James Conner, so they don't have huge voids on the team. So while on paper the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be a really different team than they started the season off on paper last year, in practice, they are going to be pretty similar to what they were last year. And I think the few questions you have are about replacing Antonio Brown. And we know that Juju Smith-Schuster is going to be there as a number one option. But now that Juju is going to take more responsibility in this offense, who is going to emerge as that legit number two option for Juju to take some of the pressure off of him? Now, I don't doubt Pittsburgh's ability to develop this guy in their franchise history. They've always been able to develop this guy. I mean, so to me, it's going to be a question more of who's going to step up. Is it a guy like Dante Moncrief who is trying to reestablish himself in the league? Or will it be a rookie like Deontay Johnson who is trying to prove himself, who is also the 3rd round pick out of Toledo, who you acquired because you traded Antonio Brown? And that would be almost poetic in a way. The next question for Pittsburgh is, how ready is Devin Bush going to be immediately in order to contribute to this Steelers defense? If the Steelers defense has been missing anything in the last few years, it's most certainly their play at linebacker. With high draft picks like Jarvis Jones not panning out in the past and the tragic injury to Ryan Shazier, it's been a position group that they have needed a talent infusion, and they did the right thing by trading up to get Devin Bush, an outstanding linebacker from Michigan, who seems like he's going to be the type of guy who's going to be ready day one. But him being a rookie means that he's going to be a huge question mark, and I think a lot of the success of the Steelers defense this year is going to be really dependent on how good Devin Bush is ready to be immediately. And the last question, and it's a question I know Steelers fans are probably tired of hearing, but is the drama truly past this team? Last year, this team was derailed and consumed by drama. Will it be proven that it was more of an Antonio Brown issue and a Le'Veon Bell issue? Or will it be shown that Antonio Brown might have had a point by criticizing Big Ben, and that Big Ben creates a lot of the problems that plagued this Pittsburgh Steelers team as the season went on? And the last team that we're going to talk about, the last team in AFC North that I haven't talked about yet, is of course the Cleveland Browns, who have a ton of questions entering into training camp. Now, the first question is going to be Freddie Kitchens. And not just Freddie Kitchens, it's going to be this whole Browns coaching staff, because this is an entirely new coaching staff. You have 3 new coordinators, one on offense, one on defense, one on special teams. You have a new head coach who has never been a head coach before in Freddie Kitchens. And you also have a gluttony of new position coaches. There are just a lot of moving pieces for this team. There's learning a new offense, learning a new defense, learning a new special team schematic. There is a lot of moving pieces for this team, for this head coach, and for this coaching staff specifically, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle that in training camp this year. It's going to be one of the most important things for the Browns if this team can handle that very well. The next question I have about this team is, how will Odell Beckham and Jarvis Landry work? How will that combo work in red zone situations? Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham are not only 2 of the Browns' most paid players, but they are 2 of the Browns' most important players. So you're going to assume that you're going to have them on the field in red zone situations, and them being of a smaller stature is going to create some interesting problems schematically for the offense. Now, whether this means that they have to take more advantage of Demetrius Harris and David Njoku, who have tremendous size at their position, or if it just means that we see a lot more of Nick Chubb in those situations. This team has enough talent to overcome that problem, but it will be interesting enough to see how this team with 2 very small star wide receivers are going to be able to do in the red zone. And the next question is about the offensive line. You only have 2 players who you really feel good about returning on this offensive line, in Joe Bitonio and JC Tretter, and those 2 players have had a tremendous amount of injury history in their career. The other 3 are guys that you don't feel as solid about. Greg Robinson, while he had a very good 8 games last season, for the most part of his career has been a huge bust. Then if you jump inside at left guard, you're either going to have Austin Corbett, who was not able to get playing time on the offensive line last year, which wasn't really his fault. The guards were really strong, but the Browns would have certainly loved to be able to give him playing time last year, and he was not able to get it. Or you're going to have to start Eric Kush, who is a journeyman who could certainly fill the role, but would not give you the dominance or the potential that you had with Kevin Zeitler. So there are a lot of question marks on this Browns offensive line, if they'll be able to get it together. And if this offensive line is no good, then that is going to cause, of course, a lot of problems for the offense. So that's going to be an important thing to watch during camp. And the last thing to look for if you're a Browns fan going to Browns camp or just watching during the preseason is, how good is this defense really? This defense has the potential and the talent to be one of the best defenses in the NFL, certainly with adding guys like Olivier Vernon and Sheldon Richardson and drafting somebody who could potentially be a stud in Greedy Williams to shore up the other side when you have a guy like Denzel Ward. But the problem is this team had a lot of talent. On paper, talent-wise, they have a top 10 to 15 defense, but in reality, I just don't know how that's going to play out. Steve Wilks is a new defensive coordinator. His history is kind of iffy when it comes to having great defenses. He's had them in the past, but he's also had terrible defenses like he had in Arizona last year. So there are just a lot of question marks about how good this Browns defense is going to be. And I think this team's success, while they might be tremendous offensively and have the potential to be record-breaking, they also need to be a top 15 to top 10 defense at the very least in order for expectations to be met this season, because we are in a very tough division and the AFC is not going to be an easy place to make a wild card, let alone win a division in this season. But that is going to be it, guys, for this week's show. In the comment section down below, please let me know what your burning question is for your team this upcoming training camp. I know everybody's excited. I'm excited, and I just can't wait to jump into this NFL season. But if you really like this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and ding the notification bell to be notified when I upload, and I do upload 3 times a week. Also, if you have a buck or two to spare, please consider becoming a patron and having your name added to this nice, delicious bar at the bottom of the screen. That is going to be it, guys. Thank you for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.